teaching, learning, and development in the midst of two pandemics. And I'm seeing if we can get this started. All right, so this is our Georgia State University presentation. We have a larger study, and this is pulling out some of our themes from that study. This is our research team, which three of us are here today, myself and Carla Tanguay and Ruchi Bhatnagar. And we began on the recognition that what we've been through in education with COVID and the time period in 2021 that had systemic racism occurring in our society, particularly here in the United States, that this led to challenges in our schools, but it also drew attention to long-standing problems that we had in education. And that as we look to where we go from here, simply returning to normal isn't going to be what we need to do. And that sort of sets the stage for our study. We in particular wanted to look at our recent graduates who had taken jobs out in school systems and were novice teachers in 2020, 2021, to describe their experiences during that time period and have them reflect on how that experience of beginning their career led them to a reimagining of what education should look like going forward. So our particular university is an urban research institution, and we're very focused on social justice and equity. And our students have experiences throughout their program. They learn how to use culturally responsive pedagogy and to advocate for learners in high needs urban schools. And so we focused on graduates who had taken jobs, and we had 23 participants from across a wide range of certification areas. They taught a lot of different content, and they came out of different programs at our institution. And we have a very diverse student population. So we had both males and females who agreed to be part of our study and that were representative of the diversity of our university. We interviewed them for approximately 30 to 45 minutes, and we did constant comparative analysis of their interview transcripts to look at the themes that emerged. And I'm going to share particular themes about their experiences. We have other papers that occur tomorrow that look at different slices of our data. The three things that I'm going to concentrate on are the challenges that these novice teachers faced during beginning their career during this time period, and what were some factors that helped them to be effective in their instruction. And then what are their thoughts on how they see the reimagining of education for the new normal? So we'll begin by really looking at two of the issues that were particularly salient for them as challenges. And the first one is related to engaging students. What happened in our area for our graduates is the majority of them began the school year virtually. They had not been prepared to be virtual teachers. They did know how to use technology, but not with the idea that they would be teaching in a virtual environment. For many of the school systems that they worked in, ended up, as the school year progressed, giving an option to families of either to return the students to school for in-person learning, or they could continue with virtual instruction. What that meant for our teachers is that they had to do what the school systems called concurrent instruction, where they taught both the students sitting in front of them in their classroom and their virtual students at the same time. As a new teacher going in, they found this extremely overwhelming and very difficult. As the school year progressed, they found that many of their virtual students became very overwhelmed. They found that they got behind, and they often stopped attending their virtual sessions, and they stopped doing their assignments. So they had a very large problem of kids who simply were not engaged. It also led to problems with our students, our graduates, trying to make connections. A large part of what our graduates learn to do and know is important is to build relationships and to be able to make connections with the community and with their experiences. But they had kids that they weren't feeling like they could build relationships with. In fact, as this quote indicates, there were kids that they felt they did not know. They didn't even know by the end of the year what these kids looked like because they never showed their face online and on the screen. And it was very difficult then for them to feel like they were able to develop the trust that they would normally have and that sense of community. And because that is what was key to their student success in the classroom, they really struggled with how to make their instruction meaningful for their students. And we looked across our data, we saw that the teachers were challenged because their students were feeling virtual fatigue, they were overwhelmed, and this issue of having to teach concurrently, even if they had students sitting in front of them, they felt they were not doing justice and were not responsive to their online students at the same time. And they experienced problems with the inequitable access to technology, that many of their districts were in situations where the students did not have what they needed in order to be able to learn, and that limited their ability to build that sense of community. Now, when we talk to them about what helped them when they did feel effective and they felt like they made a difference in their students' learning and development, it was clear that there were two mindsets and ways of working that helped them transition to effectiveness. One of those is their ability to embrace digital technologies. And when we looked at our data, some of our novice teachers went into it with a sense of, I have to learn and grow as an educator in terms of the digital tools with which I can be effective. And so they set out to explore in depth the types of things that they could use that would make them be able to reach out and become effective in this new environment. A lot of this was self-initiated, where they did virtual trainings, they searched out online, they got advice from other teachers in their schools, and they really found like they did a trial and error of what would help and what seemed to make sense in their particular environment. Some of them also relied heavily on student feedback, finding out from their students what is it that they were using that tended to work and what met their needs. And instead of just assuming what was going to work in their classroom, asking their students, what will work for you? What do you need help with? And then letting that guide the types of technology that they integrated into their classroom experience. There were also other types of supports that they found helped them be effective. Certainly one of the biggest supports was a huge increase in parental involvement. These teachers often worked into long hours of the night, calling parents, making videos for parents, communicating with parents, who became real partners in the educational process on a regular basis. But they also networked with other teachers in their school who taught the same grades, who taught the same kids, and they consolidated information to identify red flags of where there's a problem and figured out what they can do. At times that meant drawing on social workers or counselors to help make that extra step of networking with parents. But another way that they learned they had to support student success was to help kids make sense out of what they were going through, to maintain an awareness of being socially conscious and socially aware of what was happening in the lives of their students, and responding to that by how they approached instruction and conversations in the classroom. So when we look at the things that help them, it was definitely a lot of self-initiated teacher development and virtual professional development that helped them adapt to the use of digital technologies and how those digital technologies could be used both in planning and instruction and collaborating with colleagues. But they also had to be responsive to their own trial and error of what worked and student feedback. Now, in terms of supporting that success, that constant homeschool communication, networking across other school personnel, so that together you could meet students where they are and make learning real. Now, as we talk to our students about how they could look at their experiences and understand what education might need to do to change, they were very thoughtful about how we needed to recalibrate instruction. Their experiences in many of the districts led them to realize that we can't continue to just move through curriculum in the future where you just take for granted that you're going to cover a certain amount of information in a certain time period. So they had to be responsive to where their students are, what is their level, and reteach and rethink and reiterate how to go about content. And that this was going to be even more important as students came back in the subsequent year to take into account the gaps, the opportunity gaps, the experiential gaps that these children had when they came back, when they started moving on. In many of these districts, they often have had restraints of all teachers being in the same place in a certain week. And one of the things that they did find was part of their experience is it was more relaxed. They were able to teach what they needed to teach and to be more culturally responsive. And their sense is that needed to continue as they move forward after the pandemic, as they needed to meet the children where they were, both academically, but also social emotionally. They recognized that the students had to express how they felt and how they were handling their emotions. And they had to be scaffolded as they did come back to school because they hadn't been there to build rapport. They hadn't been there to develop community norms, and they needed more scaffolding in the social emotional area than ever before. Just helping them be accepting of themselves and where to go when they came back onto campus. They realized from their experiences when kids did return that that was going to be something in the new normal that they were going to have to be very focused on, is helping them adapt and helping them adjust. So when we looked across our data, we saw a strong sense of needing to build trusting relationships, but teaching to where students are academically and socially, emotionally, through making connections to their culture and their world. Definitely a sense that there needed to be flexibility in mandates so that they have the autonomy in a classroom to create safe spaces for students and reduce their fear of failure, even as they maintain high expectations. So with that, I'm not sure where I am, Carla. How much time do I have?
It's up.
It's up.
It's up.
So we'll have to have our discussion, unfortunately, after, if we have a chance in between the break sessions, instead of taking up our other presenters' opportunities. And we apologize for that. And we'll move to our next presentation,